Underbart. Så det här ska bli väldigt roligt. Så jag börjar lite på svenska. Vi ska få ta del av erfarenheterna från Storbritannien av Lucy Chappell som har byggt upp hela deras verksamhet och jobbar med den i över 10 år nu. Vi ska få lyssna på henne och jag har pratat med henne lite tidigare så hon känner till lite av vad som pågår i Sverige. Hon var även här för ett år sedan och höll ett föredrag på Svenska läkarsällskapet och väldigt intressant. Och där kommer vi också lämna för utrymme för att ställa frågor till henne. Så att fundera på vad ni tycker är spännande eller vill veta mer om, så har ni möjlighet att prata med henne efter hennes presentation. We are now very happy to have Lucy Chappell with us from the UK. She is the CEO of the National Institute for Health Research and Chief Scientific Advisor at the UK Department of Health and Social Care. And we have asked her to share her experience of creating and running this institute. A warm welcome, Lucy. We are eager to learn from your experience. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm just going to check that you can hear me, and then I'm going to share some slides and then hopefully leave time for some questions and answers. It's lovely to be back talking to this audience, and just to give you some thoughts about this topic. So I'm going to take it that you can see my slides. As mentioned, I'm the Chief Executive of the National Institute for Health and Care Research, which is the R&D funding arm of our Department of Health and Social Care, so our government department for health. I'm also a professor of obstetrics and a clinical trialist and a practicing consultant obstetrician, so my job spans really going from being a clinical academic right into the heart of government, so sort of science into policy, policy into science. And this is just from our front page of the NIHR. If you're interested, there's a video on the front page which is really describes in 2 minutes at the top right what the NIHR does. But please be curious, go and have a look. Really, to give you some context as where we do sit as a government research funder, many of you who either access research funding will be familiar with what you can see on the right, which is that we assess it on scientific excellence, on deliverability, and crucially on the pathway to impact. The NIHR is one of the government funders, with another crucial one being the Medical Research Council, the MRC, and typically we have complementary funding. So MRC funds more in the discovery science area, whereas we fund in the discovery science all the way through to applied science and implementation. But it's completely fair to say that we are funding in a health and care system in the United Kingdom that is really stretched at the moment post-pandemic. We've been through a pandemic where we pivoted a lot of our science and our research to addressing treatments and vaccines, but we still have a considerable backlog in our health and care system of people waiting for treatment. And we also, like any government funder, have a political context. So we've had a number of changes of what we call our Secretary of State, which is our politician who oversees our government department. And we also have an election coming this year. So for any government research funder, they will have to consider what the priorities of the ministers are and make sure that we are addressing those needs as well. So how do we do it? We do it through 6 core work streams. These are taken from our strategy document called Best Research for Best Health, the next chapter. So briefly, we fund research, we invest in infrastructure, we partner with patients very visibly, we capacity build across our researchers, we collaborate with other funders in industry, and we also have a global health research work stream, which uses a slightly different funding stream to make a difference globally. And what do we do? Well, at the moment, we have 7 areas of strategic focus. This doesn't define the entire of our portfolio of our work. We're very clear that we fund across the landscape, but it called out 7 areas where I think we recognized that we needed a particular focus. So recovering the system post-COVID, thinking about areas such as preventative health that we all know is crucially important right now, but it had perhaps less focus. addressing the challenge of those with multiple long-term conditions when our health and care system has often followed a single disease, single drug model. Really thinking about levelling up how we bring research to those who need it most. Thinking about research inclusion, which I'll come back to, ensuring that we had strong career pathways, and again, working with the life sciences industry. But today I want to focus on our operating principles, really just to give you a flavour of what we're doing in NIHR through this lens. So the first one is impact, and week in, week out, if I'm sitting with a minister, they'll say, show me the impact. It's not just about the money in, it's about what happens as a result of that. So I thought I'd share a few stories. These are from our NIHR News website, and I just like to go onto our current front page and say, show me some impact. So here are just some examples to make it really sort of real and tangible to you. So using NHS data to predict risk of falling. Our first in the world baby born deaf can hear after breakthrough gene therapy. So really that cutting edge impact. Thinking about treatments for children with brain cancer, but also a whole variety of stories, app to help people reduce in alcohol intake. This sort of showcases the complete breadth and depth of what we might be funding. But impact isn't just in one dimension. It's as important for a health and care system to say what doesn't work. So this example from our evidence collection, where we find that if you have a joint replacement, you can safely stop routine follow-up in the 1 to 10 year period after surgery without any adverse impact. Think about in a stretched health and care system, what that can do to help release further opportunities in orthopedics and rehab. Impact can also be seen as scientific discovery, so it may not be ready to translate into patients right now, but these examples about, for example, blood tests for diagnosing dementia, or even the bottom right one, where we think about what are the wider health determinants. They are all on our pathway to discovery and just as crucial. And a different version of impact, which I think is so crucial, is about capacity building. So that might be in our nurses and midwives program, it might be about our senior investigators, and it might be capacity building on the global health stage. So all areas where impact isn't just one dimensional, it's in many dimensions. Our second area is excellence. And I think as a health research funder, we should ask, what does excellence look like? So in the UK, we have something called the Research Excellence Framework, where every 7 years or so, the government takes a look at the excellence of the research that we fund across all areas, not just health, but every single area. And they use it to define how they allocate funding. So I went to the website and I said, show me the impact cases that have named NIHR, and there are 392 impact cases where NIHR is name-checked, because our health and care researchers know that we're a crucial part of that, driving that excellence. And this is where they have to make the case really for going from discovery science and translating that through to impact and showcasing that excellence. But you can also see excellence as innovation. So, for example, some of our funding programs, I've called out Invention for Innovation, has got a real focus on saying, how does it turbocharge that innovation? And, we have other areas where, for example, we are investing in some of our critical technologies like artificial intelligence, including using AI to really drive understanding multiple long-term conditions. So seeing AI as one of our sort of innovative technologies at the cutting edge with one of our real demographic challenges. And it may also be using different methodology, so innovative data-driven approaches. So, for example, we have, in tandem with our NHS England colleagues, we have something called DigiTrials, where if you want to do a clinical trial, you can go on a population basis to reach those communities that might otherwise not engage with research, because often there's gatekeeping. There may be gatekeeping, particularly at a health and care professional level, or there may be other barriers to access research. We see this as crucial to research inclusion. So to come on to more of what we're doing in this space, I often start by making the case for inclusion about being the scientific case. For me, as a scientist, increasing our knowledge by considering the whole breadth of the population that we serve, but also thinking about the economic case, whether it's for a commissioner of health services or an industry partner. If you want adoption across your population, you need inclusion at the research stage, not at the end stage. And finally, for the health outcomes, I think if you're going to improve outcomes for all, so what we might call raising the floor, not just raising the ceiling, then you need that inclusion to be built in at the design stage, not as an afterthought. So we have a whole set of toolkits across NIHR to really sort of support inclusion at the ground level. And we're also putting some funding. So, for example, on the top left, you can see what is called Core 20+5. It's the healthcare inequalities that our health service has identified, and it's pulled out 5 areas: maternity, mental illness, respiratory disease, early cancer diagnosis, and hypertension finding. And this year, we've just launched our first large challenge funding to tackle the first of these, the inequalities in maternity care. But we also have thought really differently about driving and supporting research inclusion. For example, partnering on health determinants with local government and really saying that we want to see this from a population basis, not just from a very secondary care basis. We also believe that diverse researchers drive research inclusion. So if we have more researchers who look like our population and really are representative, we think that's a crucial aspect of that virtuous circle. We have an NIHR infrastructure which accounts for about 50% of our funding on a very distributed basis, and we constantly look at how to support that regional footprint and ask our regions to join up. So we fund infrastructure through a whole variety of mechanisms, both in the biomedical research centres, which are our earlier phase, and our applied research collaborations. And you can see from this map, we're primarily fund our infrastructure in England, but a lot of our programmes are opening up across the UK about how that's distributed. And similarly, there's often a view that science is just concentrated in Oxford and Cambridge and London, which you'll have heard of. But actually, if you look at our research programme funding, we really, again, try to go for scientific excellence that is across the country. And the London, Cambridge, Oxford is known as the Golden Triangle. I think there's gold everywhere, and it's just up to us as the government funder to find it. So, for example, I mentioned our health determinant research collaborations. We know that there's many underserved populations across the country, and this is our geographic footprint. And I could show you this for any of our big funding consortia that we fund. Similarly, we look at research delivery. So we fund something called the Research Delivery Network, where we put around 10 or 11,000 staff. They stay with their host employer, which might be an NHS trust, and we fund. So these are our figures for the last 5 years, and this is number of studies. So you can see that all of our regions have got research delivery. If you think about COVID, some of our best recruiting sites were really distributed across the country. If you look at the number of participants per region, so some of our regions are recruiting 100,000 participants per year. Across the country at the moment, we recruit around 90,000 participants per month into our studies through this research delivery network. And it's a really crucial way of saying that regions can lead on how they execute this funding. So I'll come on to collaboration. For us, this is crucial. We are not operating in a silo. We very much want to fund with colleagues. So we have funding with other government funders. I mentioned the Medical Research Council here and Innovate UK, again, which really supports some of our industry partners. But we also fund with charities. charities serve two purposes. We can often amplify the funding that they have, but they really reach out to patient groups in a way that is complementary to what we do in the NIHR, and are crucial advocates for their disease areas. But we've also got a very live support for industry. We recognise the partnership that brings. We recognise the access it brings for new patients, for new treatments and diagnostics. And so we've really been focusing on particularly since the COVID pandemic, when our industry research took somewhat of a hit while we paused it for COVID, although we did partner with industry for some of our COVID research, really recognising that the UK or any country should be working on that. An example of a different sort of collaboration is we have funded 3 research schools. So one in primary care research, one in public health research, and one in social care research. Those were 3 areas that we recognised particularly needed further support. And again, it goes back to that need for population health. And then we asked our 3 schools to come together on really what we might call knotty problems. So mental health, seen both not just from the hospital perspective, but very much from the primary and community perspective and the public health perspective. Similarly for dementia, which crosses health and social care. So patients don't really see it as either being health or care, they just see it as what their needs might be. And more recently, we've gone into a prevention programme and again asked these 3 crucial aspects of our health and care system to take it on and work with various partners. So I'm going to finish with our last principle, which is effectiveness. And you could really ask, how do you measure effectiveness? And you could measure it through many different routes. But for me, it's about saying, is it effective? Is it better for patients? And we know that research active trusts, and we think everyone should be able to be a research active trust, has got better patient care outcomes. And we have a page on our website called Embedding a Research Culture, where we talk about the evidence that those trusts that take part in research, either through research delivery, as I talked about earlier, or through being the research intellectual contribution, there are better patient outcomes. So through our research delivery network, we want to make that open to everyone and to balance where we can do this on a national basis with where we can allow our regions really to drive the research that's important to them and really highly relevant to their population. We've previously produced some heat maps. So, for example, liver disease might be particularly prevalent, and then try to enable pairing of research for liver disease to those populations most effective. But we also know that our work with industry can provide that access for patients to be for new treatments and diagnostics. We also think it's crucial to talk about better for workforce. So many developed economies are struggling with how do you recruit and retain your workforce? It's particularly true in the UK. And so one of the things that we talk about is research is core to care. Research is everybody's business. So imagine where you both get that patient pool to be part of research, but you really ask for all health and care practitioners around the system to want to be either active in research or leading research, or even just aware of research and able to signpost their patient population to what's taking place. And you can do that through incentives, but also just that education piece to say, look at the opportunities. So on the right, you can see how we support this in NIHR by saying, how could you take the first steps? So it might be that you want to get involved with offering those studies to patients, and then, or you might want to take further steps into getting involved. And so making sure that we're reducing the barriers to getting, for any of our workforce to getting involved, and working with the boards at our trusts to say, how could you support this? And the third way is to say, how can we show that it's better for the health and care system? So what does that impact look like that I touched on at the beginning? I've talked about improving clinical practice, how to think about making healthcare cost effective. So if I'm making the argument with our Treasury colleagues, or we have a spending review where we bid for research and development funding, I need to be ready with the economic case. but also thinking about how research informs policy. As a chief scientific advisor, and I'm giving advice to ministers, it's quite right that they say, well, what's the evidence base? And research should be part of that evidence generation that actually informs policy so that our politicians can make the best decisions. And then finally, thinking about health beyond borders. And in the days of climate change and pandemics, we can't just pull up the drawbridge and say this is about the UK. So we have both our global health research that works in low and middle income countries, but we also have international partners. And for example, we've signed a memorandum of understanding with Sweden, particularly on our life sciences offer. So I want to say that's a sort of a real, I hope, given you a feel of how our government funder as NIHR funds and enables and really supports both that science excellence, but a very strong translation into impact for patients and public. Thank you very much. I'll take down the slides and very happy to do address any questions.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That's a lot of information, very relevant, very interesting. I'll start. I have the privilege of putting the first question up. If you would give any advice, you know, we have this really good collaboration now within for life science, as you mentioned at the end, and you have struggled with the issues in inequality in healthcare, the cost burden of healthcare, and so on. And you very, very nicely put together how you work with it. But what would be your advice for us here in Sweden at this point? And I can just mention also we have new numbers that on clinical trials that we're actually struggling to try to get those up and increased.
That's a really good question. So I think we have a few routes, and we have to approach it from that multifaceted way. So, for example, we've just done a reset program where we thought about what are the barriers from an investigator's point of view or from a research sponsor's point of view. So for us, we use the word research sponsor to mean the institutions that are supporting the research, and what are the barriers from the industry's point of view. So what levers do we have? So some of those levers are financial, some of those are regulation, and some of them are policy levers. So, for example, some of the ways we reduced the barriers were to implement something called national contract value review. So rather than the life sciences company having to go round and negotiate with every single site separately, we said you can have a model template and a single costing, and that every site that did commercial research had to use this. So that's come in, and I'm delighted to say that as of last December, every single site in the UK has accepted the national contract value review. And what that means is that people around the country can focus their work on actually getting the research open and set up. In parallel, we looked at our regulators. So we have the MHRA, the Medicines and Healthcare Regulatory Authority, and they work in partnership with our HRA, our Health Research Authority. And we asked them to really look at their turnaround time and to deliver against their metric, because industry told us, but actually the same is true for investigators. They want a really reliable, predictable, sustainable model. And then we've looked at a number of opportunities at the research delivery level to say, how do we make it possible to offer commercial research equitably? And this is often sometimes a tension between our academic and those who are doing academic studies, charity-funded studies, and industry. My answer is that there's enough. There's enough to go round. So if we just lower the barriers to participation in research more generally, we can achieve this. And if you look at our numbers, our numbers per month were 61,000 per month recruited into research pre-pandemic. and they're now at 90,000 per month recruited. So the willingness of participants to take part in research to help improve care is clear. Our numbers on commercial research have gone from about 3,200 per month pre-pandemic and are currently sitting at around 10,000 per month. So it's not, as we call it, a zero-sum game. We've both grown the numbers participating both in our commercial research and our non-commercial research through looking at all of those levers. It's a very coordinated system-wide approach rather than people pointing at one bit of the system and saying it's their fault. We've said it's a team approach and use that to drive forward the improvements.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm sure this audience understands why the Agenda Group found it interesting to take a look at you and see it with Swedish eyes, put it in a proposal that has the Swedish version of it, because of course we have differences, but there's so many common sense things really in this, and of course hard to carry out, but it's harder if we don't. We really need to make these changes now. I will open up to questions and comments for Lucy that you might have here in the audience. Don't be shy. Yes, please, Barbro. And please introduce yourself with name and organization.
Barbro Källström, I'm the chair for the National Association for Quality Registries, National Quality Registries. Mm-hmm. And I have to say I found your presentation so inspiring, because I can see a lot of the pieces you present. We have them in Sweden. We have the registries, we have the organizations, we have everything. We just have to have the umbrella and put them together. And I think that would save money, life for everybody. I mean, that would improve healthcare so much, research and everything. So I'm almost out of voice here because I'm so inspired. It's so wonderful. So thank you so much. And thank you, Anna and Forska for doing this.
Thank you. So it took Dame Sally Davis, who went on to become the Chief Medical Officer, to persuade, and Sally Davis can be extremely persuasive. She was talking about antimicrobial resistance last week, to say, rather than exactly what you described, rather than all these different, more fragmented, what would it look like to bring them all together? And recognizing as to when you do transition into a new organization, then what do people lose, or what might people feel that they're leaving behind? But what I've seen, as I've been the third chief executive of the National Institute for Health and Care Research, is the huge opportunities, and really to bring people with us and to constantly ask, how do we continue to do that? So, for example, we knew to constantly ask, how could we make people feel even more involved and engaged, rather than assuming that they should come with us? In fact, we sit at about 1% of the total health and care system budget. So our budget is about it's just gone up to 1.5 billion this year in GB pounds, and the total NHS budget's about 150 billion. Now, you could argue that any health and care system should be really aiming much more for 2% or 2.5%. But if you think about taking the whole of the budget for your health system or your health and care system and say, what would a 1% ring-fenced pot? That's exactly how NIHR was born. And then what we need is that those of us who step up to lead constantly seek to make it inclusive and ask about what that engagement looks like. And so some of the programs that we're doing now try and ensure that no one is left behind.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I will follow up on that, because one thing you and I talked about a little bit previously was about the regional and the governmental state level and the pull and push between those. What is your experience in working with that phase to make it beneficial for everybody?
It's a very good question, and it's something that we look at very regularly. So inevitably, some of our a good number of our programs and our funding may have a coordinated centralised start. But unless we reach all of our regions, then we haven't done our job. And I really feel strongly that there should be no research deserts, nowhere where patients or workforce cannot access research, because for me it's the driver for innovation and better outcomes. So we both might coordinate the funding centrally, but work really strongly on a regional footprint. We are in 100% of our secondary care sites, so our hospital sites. We're in around 50% of our primary care sites, but I would really like to see that increase. And we can only do that with a very strong voice from the regions. So, for example, I mentioned our regional, our research delivery network, which really operates on those that regional footprint. Interestingly, I was at a meeting yesterday of our senior investigators, and some of them said, Lucy, will you dictate what support is provided at a regional level? And other people say to me, Lucy, we want to have that ownership ourselves. And you often have to find a balance between that top-down, bottom-up. So I would strongly say that you need both where that coordination happens from a centralized level to make it coherent, but also how you empower your regions to know their populations and their systems, and then to see that coordination piece. So, for example, there is so much that is important in networks, because most of us will achieve far more if we don't sit in what we would call an academic ivory tower, but have a reach or through a network or through a coordinated approach. I'm still an investigator myself, and I'm running a trial in pregnancy hypertension. And I have explicitly gone to every single region in the country and said, we would like your representation because we think that your population matters. And if we then want adoption of the findings of my trial, I know that if it has had a footprint in every single region, that region will feel, well, our patients took part, we want to be part of that.
Excellent. Thank you very much. I see that Nina has a question or a comment.
I have a question.
Nina, you might introduce yourself so Sally knows who you are.
My name is Nina Rehnqvist. I used to be Chief Medical Officer at about 10 years ago, or more than that. Anyway, my question is, how much of political support, or could you comment on the political support that you got?
I'm just wondering who's in the room, because I can't see you, and whether you've got politicians in the room. So it's a very good question. And I sit in the Department of Health and Social Care, and our top level is called Permanent Secretary, and I'm a Director General. So I'm the level under Perm Sec, and that means that I am in the civil service, and that is because I sit in the department, I have daily, weekly interactions with our ministers. So this is where what we saw through COVID, where what is it that we do as scientists in terms of providing scientific advice, and what is it that I do as chief exec of the government funder, which is the R&D funding arm of the department. And the answer is that unless I can persuade our politicians and our ministers and our Secretary of State of the importance of research and development going into innovation in the health service, then I haven't really done my job. Now, I can provide choices for our politicians to make in terms of investment, and we have a process by which we will ask our politicians if they are in agreement with the choices that, or to make some choices. There is a reality that I will be very upfront about, which is that much of our funding needs to be on a longer term horizon than your typical government election cycle. So we are often funding for 3 to 5 years or beyond to get our best science. And if you look at how quickly the UK pivoted to COVID, so we had the recovery trial up and running in a matter of days. We had vaccines being developed. That didn't come from, a standing start. That is because of all that foundational science investment. We're lucky it's not luck, but we have 4 of the 10 top universities in the world. So unless you see that sustained investment in the science, I would call out the strengths of the Sweden science system. And we have to say to the politicians that you need a combination of that foundational science investment. Look at what you've invested in, for example, in data. You can't just turn that on and off like a tap, but it then allows you to take ministerial priorities. So, for example, one of the priorities of our current Secretary of State has been to look at maternity. And so to say we can then pivot some of our funding that is not contracted out to the ministerial priorities. So for me, it's a blend of both, saying we both need the foundational science investment that transcends election cycles, but we can then address both the health and care needs of the day and also ministerial priorities. Does that feel like a sort of a fair response that both, it's a question of how do we align with, and sometimes politicians make different choices, but how do we give them sensible, sort of, the best choices to make?
Thank you, Lucy. I see Nina nodding and our politicians as well. We do have the Minister of Healthcare with us today, and she's been listening carefully as well. And thank you for all your generous advice, your presentation, and I think a lot of us are very inspired by this, and I'm sure you'll have a lot of people looking on your website, and we'll continue to talk about how we in Sweden may use your experiences and the lessons learned to make something better in Sweden as well. And so thank you very much, Lucy.
Lovely. I'm honoured to be asked and just see so many opportunities. Sweden's got such strengths, and so I really look forward to further opportunities of liaising. Thank you.
Thank you so much.